I'm Martha Williams, 68 years old, and yesterday I discovered something that shattered my world. My son Richard had taken out a $2 million life insurance policy on me without my knowledge. Today, he showed up unannounced at my home with an unusual eagerness to hand me a glass of water. My hands trembled as I accepted it, maternal instinct screaming danger. When he stepped outside to take a call, I switched our bottles. A mother's love is unconditional, but my survival instinct is stronger. I wonder where you're watching this from? Hit that like button and subscribe if you've ever had to make a difficult choice to protect yourself from someone you love. Richard was only 10 when his father Daniel passed away unexpectedly from a heart attack. One moment we were planning our 20th anniversary trip to Yellowstone, and the next I was a widow planning a funeral and figuring out how to raise our son alone. Daniel had been the primary breadwinner as a construction foreman, while I worked part-time at the local library. His life insurance barely covered the funeral expenses and 6 months of mortgage payments. Those early years were the hardest. I took on 2 additional jobs: waitressing at Denny's on weekends and bookkeeping for a local plumbing company 3 evenings a week. I'd leave sticky notes with heating instructions for TV dinners and lists of homework reminders all over our kitchen. Richard became what they call now a latchkey kid, letting himself in after school and often being alone until I dragged myself home exhausted at 9 or 10 at night. "Mom, I got an A on my science project," he'd tell me, his eyes seeking approval even as I could barely keep mine open. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," I'd mumble, trying to muster enthusiasm while calculating how many hours of sleep I could get before my 5 a.m. alarm. Despite my absence, Richard thrived academically. He was always bright, with a mathematical mind that reminded me of his father. By 13, he was handling our grocery budget and suggesting ways I could save money. His practical intelligence amazed me, though I sometimes worried about his emotional development. He rarely showed vulnerability, keeping his feelings bottled up much like Daniel had done. "You don't have to be strong all the time," I told him once after he didn't cry at his grandfather's funeral. "Someone has to be," he replied, sounding far older than 16. High school brought us closer despite the grueling schedule I maintained. I had finally secured a full-time position at the county library with benefits, which meant I could drop the waitressing job. Richard joined the debate team and excelled at it, his logical mind and persuasive abilities making him a formidable opponent. I never missed a debate competition, sitting proudly in the audience as he methodically dismantled his opponent's arguments. Senior year was Richard's triumph. He graduated as valedictorian and secured a full scholarship to State University for Business and Finance. His graduation speech moved me to tears. "Success isn't measured by what you have," he told his classmates, "but by how you overcome obstacles placed in your path." My mother taught me that perseverance is the greatest virtue. I believed then that he had absorbed the values I tried to instill despite our difficult circumstances. The struggle seemed worthwhile as I watched him accept his diploma, the first in our family to attend college. State University was only an hour's drive away, but Richard rarely came home. He immersed himself in campus life, joining investment clubs and business fraternities. When he did visit, he'd talk excitedly about compound interest, market trends, and wealth-building strategies I barely understood. Something in his eyes changed during those college years. A hungry gleam appeared when he discussed money. He met Stephanie during junior year. She was studying marketing, came from a wealthy Connecticut family, and had connections Richard coveted. I found her pleasant enough, but noticed how she appraised our modest home with barely concealed dismay. At their graduation dinner, her parents paid for an expensive restaurant I could never have afforded, making me acutely aware of the class difference. "Mrs. Williams, Richard tells us you've made such sacrifices for his education," Stephanie's mother Patricia said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "You must be proud he's moving up in the world." Moving up in a way it seemed. After graduation, Richard accepted a position at a financial services firm in the city and moved into a luxury apartment with Stephanie. Their wedding a year later was an elaborate affair that made me feel like an outsider. I wore a dress I'd saved 3 months to buy, while Stephanie's mother dripped with diamonds and whispered about the rustic charm of including me in the wedding party. The first 5 years of Richard's career were marked by rapid advancement. He called regularly, though our conversations grew increasingly one-sided. He'd talk about client acquisitions, portfolio management, and his growing network of influential connections. When I mentioned library events or my garden, his interest seemed forced. "That's nice, Mom," he'd say, then quickly redirect. "Listen, I've been thinking about your retirement. We should discuss moving your pension into more aggressive investments." His visits became annual obligations around Christmas, with Stephanie often finding excuses to stay in the city. Their children, Emma and James, became the grandchildren I saw primarily through social media posts and obligatory video calls on my birthday. The distance grew over the next decade. Richard transformed from the thoughtful, if emotionally reserved, boy I raised into someone increasingly fixated on outward appearances and material success. The gleam in his eyes when discussing money had hardened into something colder, more calculating. I told myself it was the pressure of his high-stress career, but deep down, maternal instinct warned me something fundamental had changed in my son. Looking back now, I can identify moments I should have recognized as warning signs. The way he inspected my home with a property developer's eye rather than nostalgic attachment. His irritation when I refused to upgrade my perfectly functional 10-year-old car to something more appropriate for his mother. The dismissive tone when discussing my limited financial understanding. But a mother sees what she wants to see, and I chose to focus on his achievements rather than the troubling changes in his character. The first hint of Richard's financial problems came 3 years ago, when I noticed his name in the business section of our local newspaper. I still subscribe to the print edition, a habit Richard constantly teases me about. "Mom, nobody gets news on paper anymore," he'd say. But that morning I was grateful for my outdated habit. A small article mentioned litigation against several investment advisors, including Richard Williams of Pinnacle Wealth Management, for alleged misrepresentation of investment risks to clients. I called him immediately, of course. "It's nothing, Mom," he assured me, irritation edging his voice. "Just a disgruntled client who didn't understand market fluctuations. The company lawyers are handling it." I believed him then, filing it away as an unfortunate but minor professional setback. Yet over the next several months, more concerning signs appeared. The annual Christmas visit was canceled because they couldn't get away, though Stephanie's Instagram showed photos of a ski trip to Aspen that same week. Richard's calls became less frequent, and when we did speak, he seemed distracted, often ending our conversations abruptly for urgent client matters. Spring brought an unexpected visit. Richard appeared at my door unannounced, looking uncharacteristically disheveled. "Mom, I need to discuss something important," he said, pacing my living room instead of sitting down. "It's about your finances." He explained that he was concerned about my financial vulnerability as I aged. He suggested I needed someone to help manage my accounts, protect my assets, and ensure I wasn't taken advantage of. The solution, conveniently, was granting him power of attorney and adding him to my accounts. "It's just a precaution," he insisted. "Dad didn't leave much planning in place, and I don't want you struggling if something happens." His concern seemed genuine, and I reminded myself that finance was his area of expertise. After some consideration, I agreed to add him as a secondary on my checking and savings accounts to help manage bill payments. I drew the line at power of attorney, insisting I was still perfectly capable of making my own decisions. "We can revisit that when I'm actually showing signs of decline, Richard," I said firmly. He acquiesced with obvious disappointment but seemed satisfied with the account access. I didn't think much of it until my quarterly pension statement arrived showing several large withdrawals I hadn't authorized. When I called the bank, they confirmed the transactions had been made by Richard using his secondary access. I confronted him by phone that evening. "Oh, that," he said casually. "I was rebalancing your portfolio, Mom. You had too much cash sitting idle. I moved it into some investments that will serve you better long term." "Without discussing it with me first?" I asked, unable to hide my shock. "I tried explaining investment strategy to you before and your eyes glazed over," he replied with a patronizing laugh. "Trust me, this is for the best." That conversation planted the first serious seed of doubt. I checked my accounts more regularly after that, and noticed smaller withdrawals occurring monthly. When questioned, Richard always had plausible explanations about management fees or tax optimization strategies that sounded legitimate but left me feeling uneasy. Around this time, Richard began suggesting I sell my house. The property had appreciated significantly over the 40 years I'd owned it, and according to him, it was wasteful for me to rattle around alone in a 3-bedroom home. Think about it, Mom. You could sell for at least $400,000, downsize to a nice retirement community condo for half that, and invest the difference for additional income. What he called rattling around, I called living with memories. Every corner of this house held traces of Daniel and Richard's childhood. The door frame in the kitchen still had pencil marks tracking Richard's height from ages 5 to 17. The backyard oak tree still supported the remains of a treehouse Daniel built. The idea of leaving seemed unthinkable. I'm comfortable here, I insisted. And the mortgage is paid off, so my expenses are just taxes and utilities. Richard became increasingly pushy about the house over the next year. During one visit, I overheard him on the phone with someone discussing comparable properties in the area and market timing. When he saw me listening, he quickly ended the call. Meanwhile, signs of financial strain in his own life became more evident. Stephanie's social media posts about luxury purchases and exotic vacations abruptly ceased. Their Christmas gifts to me, once extravagant, became noticeably modest. Richard mentioned temporarily pulling the kids from private school due to curriculum issues, though I suspected the real reason was tuition costs. I learned the truth from my friend Beverly, whose son works in banking in the same city as Richard. We were having our weekly coffee at Magnolia Cafe when she hesitantly brought it up. "Martha, I'm not sure if I should tell you this," she said, stirring her coffee nervously. "But Thomas mentioned something about Richard's firm that concerns me." According to Thomas, Pinnacle Wealth Management was under federal investigation for fraudulent practices. Several senior partners had already resigned, and rumors indicated the company might face bankruptcy. Richard, as a junior partner, stood to lose everything if the firm collapsed. "I'm only telling you this because Thomas is worried Richard might be desperate," Beverly said, reaching for my hand. "And desperate people sometimes make bad decisions." That evening, I went through my financial statements meticulously. Over the past 2 years, nearly $70,000 had disappeared from my accounts through various withdrawals and transfers. My retirement safety net was unraveling, and my own son was pulling the threads. I called my bank the next morning and removed Richard's access to all my accounts, citing potential fraud concerns. The representative asked if I wanted to file a formal complaint, but I couldn't bring myself to take that step against my own child. Instead, I moved my remaining funds to a new account at a different bank. When Richard discovered what I'd done, his reaction confirmed my worst fears. "How could you do this?" he demanded during a heated phone call. "After everything I've done to help you? Do you have any idea what I'm dealing with right now?"
I finchi do, he replied calmly.
"And I'm sorry for your troubles, Richard, but my money isn't the solution to them." He hung up without another word. We didn't speak for 3 weeks after that conversation. When he finally called again, his tone had changed completely. He was apologetic, almost uncomfortably deferential. "I've been under a lot of pressure, Mom," he explained. "But that's no excuse for how I've behaved. Let me make it up to you. I want to help get your affairs in order properly." His sudden change in demeanor should have raised red flags, but I wanted so badly to believe my son had come to his senses. When he suggested visiting to discuss options for my future, I agreed, hoping we could repair our relationship. I never imagined what I would discover during that visit. Richard arrived on a Thursday afternoon carrying his leather briefcase and a box of my favorite pastries from Anderson's Bakery downtown. The gesture seemed thoughtful, reminiscent of the considerate boy he once was. "The house looks good, Mom," he commented, though I noticed his eyes cataloging items of potential value. The grandfather clock from Daniel's parents, my modest jewelry box visible on the bedroom dresser. We spent the afternoon reviewing what he called essential documents: my will, home deed, insurance policies, and healthcare directives. He seemed particularly interested in my medical history. "Any changes with your heart condition?" he asked casually. "I have mild arrhythmia that's been controlled with medication for years." "Same as always," I replied. Dr. Larson says I'm doing well for my age. Richard nodded, making notes in his leather portfolio. And the medications are working? No adverse effects. His interest seemed excessive, but I attributed it to thoroughness. After dinner, Richard mentioned a conference call he needed to join, setting up his laptop at the kitchen table while I cleared dishes. He stepped outside to take a preliminary call, leaving his briefcase open beside the laptop. I wasn't snooping, at least that's what I tell myself. A folder had slipped partially out of his briefcase, and as I set down a coffee mug, I noticed my name printed on the tab. Curiosity and concern prompted me to pull it out. Inside was a life insurance policy from Atlantic Security Life. The policyholder was listed as Richard Williams, but the insured was Martha Williams me. The death benefit amount made me gasp, $2 million. The policy had been taken out just 3 months earlier, with Richard as the sole beneficiary. My hands trembled as I flipped through the pages. There was my medical information, much of it outdated or slightly inaccurate in ways that made my health seem worse than it actually was. Under insured's acknowledgement, a signature that vaguely resembled mine appeared. A forgery I would never have noticed if I hadn't been looking directly at it. The sound of Richard concluding his call sent me scrambling to return the folder to his briefcase. I retreated to the kitchen sink, my mind racing and stomach churning with implications too terrible to contemplate. Sorry about that, Richard said, returning inside. Client emergencies never respect dinner hours. I somehow maintained a normal conversation through the remainder of the evening, though my perception of everything had altered drastically. Each time Richard refreshed my water glass or suggested I take my evening medication, cold fear washed through me. After he left for his hotel, promising to return in the morning to finalize some details, I sat in my darkened living room wrestling with devastating possibilities. The internet became my companion as I searched phrases like children insurance policies parents and life insurance fraud suspicious deaths. The results were horrifying. Cases of children poisoning elderly parents for insurance payouts, manipulating medication dosages to cause natural deaths, creating accidents that couldn't be traced. One article detailed a son who gradually introduced antifreeze into his mother's favorite sweet tea. The ethylene glycol undetectable once kidney failure was attributed to her age and pre-existing conditions. Could my Richard be planning something similar? The boy who'd once made me handprint Mother's Day cards and cried when he accidentally broke my favorite coffee mug? I cycled through denial, rationalization, and heartbreaking acceptance as night turned to early morning. Perhaps there was an innocent explanation. Perhaps Richard had legitimately purchased the policy as some kind of estate planning strategy one didn't understand. Perhaps the forged signature was an administrative error. Perhaps, but the pattern of his financial desperation, his recent interest in my health, and the secretive nature of the policy all pointed to sinister intent. Around 3 a.m., I called my sister Diane in Arizona. Though we weren't particularly close, she was the only person I could think of who might understand the complexity of my situation. Martha? Is everything okay? Her voice was thick with sleep. I'm not sure, I admitted. Richard's been acting strangely. I didn't reveal everything, just enough to express my concerns about his financial troubles and unusual interest in my assets. Even in my distress, some maternal instinct prevented me from voicing my darkest suspicions. You know, I've never trusted that boy's obsession with money, Diane said bluntly. Daniel would be heartbroken to see what he's become. What should I do? I asked, feeling more vulnerable than I had since being widowed. Trust your gut, Martha. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Don't confront him until you're safe and have evidence. After we hung up, I remembered a news story from last year. An elderly woman in Oregon who suspected her caregiver was stealing medication. She had installed small cameras purchased online and caught the theft on video. The evidence had led to an arrest and conviction. The next morning, I called Ethan Jenkins, the 16-year-old grandson of my neighbor, who helped with technical problems. By noon, he had installed 2 tiny cameras, one in my kitchen and one in the living room, connected to an app on my phone. The $50 I paid him was the best investment I'd ever made. Mrs. Williams, are you in some kind of trouble? Ethan asked as he demonstrated how the system worked. Just being cautious, I replied, patting his arm. At my age, it's better to be safe than sorry. With the cameras in place and recording, I waited anxiously for Richard's return. If my suspicions were wrong, no harm done. I'd delete the footage and work on my trust issues. But if they were right, I couldn't complete the thought. The idea that my own child might be plotting my death for financial gain was too monstrous to fully comprehend. Yet somewhere in my heart, maternal instinct had already accepted what my mind refused to acknowledge. The son I raised was gone, replaced by someone I no longer recognized or trusted. And that someone was coming back tomorrow, perhaps with lethal intentions disguised as filial concern. Richard arrived promptly at 10 the next morning. I'd barely slept, my body tense with hypervigilance and grief. He brought coffee and more pastries, his solicitousness setting my nerves further on edge. "You look tired, Mom," he commented, scrutinizing my face. "Did you sleep poorly?" "Age does that sometimes," I replied vaguely. "Shall we finish our discussion from yesterday?" We settled in the living room with our coffee. Richard opened his portfolio and began outlining what he called efficient asset transfers, complicated financial maneuvers that seemed designed to give him greater control over my property and investments. I nodded and asked appropriate questions while surreptitiously checking the camera app on my phone to ensure it was recording. Midway through our conversation, Richard excused himself to use the bathroom. On the camera feed, I watched him take an unexpected detour to my bedroom. He opened my medicine cabinet, examining several prescription bottles before returning to the hallway bathroom. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I composed my expression before he returned. "Sorry about that," he said smoothly. Now where were we? As our discussion continued, Richard steered the conversation toward my funeral preferences, a topic we'd never previously discussed. "It's uncomfortable to talk about, I know," he said, noticing my expression. "But pre-planning saves your loved ones difficult decisions during their grief." "I suppose you're right," I conceded, watching him closely, "though I haven't given it much thought." "You should," he insisted. "For instance, would you prefer burial or cremation? Any specific religious service? These details matter, Mom." His intensity about funeral arrangements sent another chill through me. Was he planning that far ahead already? Around noon, Richard suggested we break for lunch. "I'll make us something," he offered, heading to the kitchen before I could protest. On my phone, I watched him open the refrigerator and retrieve the pitcher of filtered water I always kept inside. He poured 2 glasses, then reached into his jacket pocket and removed a small vial. With his back toward where he thought I was sitting, he carefully added several drops to one of the glasses, stirring it with his finger. My blood turned to ice. There it was, undeniable evidence of his intentions. I forced myself to breathe normally as he returned with the water glasses and a plate of sandwiches. "Here you go, Mom," he said, deliberately handing me the glass I'd watched him tamper with. "You should stay hydrated. Your color doesn't look good today." I accepted the glass with a steady hand that belied my internal terror. "Thank you, dear. Would you mind grabbing some napkins? I forgot them." The moment Richard returned to the kitchen, I placed the glass on the coffee table, my mind racing through options. Confrontation seemed dangerous. What if he became desperate when exposed? Refusing to drink might make him suspicious and lead to another attempt I couldn't anticipate. My phone buzzed with a text message. Richard called out, "Your phone's ringing, Mom. Want me to bring it?" "No," I answered quickly. "It's probably just one of those spam texts. But while you're there, could you check if there's any ice in the freezer? This water's a bit warm." As Richard rummaged through the freezer, I made my decision. I switched our glasses, placing his untainted water where mine had been and moving the poisoned glass to his side of the table. The entire exchange took less than 3 seconds. "No ice," Richard reported, returning to the living room. "The ice maker must be acting up again. I've been telling you to replace that refrigerator for years." "It works fine most days," I replied, watching as he settled back into his seat. Richard's phone rang, and he checked the screen with a frown. "I need to take this. Client emergency. Excuse me a moment." He stepped onto the back porch, closing the door behind him but remaining visible through the window. I used the opportunity to pretend to sip from my glass, now containing the safe water. Richard glanced back several times during his call, nodding with satisfaction when he saw me drinking. When he returned, he picked up his own glass, the one I'd switched containing whatever substance he'd added, but didn't immediately drink. Instead, he continued our discussion about estate planning, holding the glass but only bringing it near his lips occasionally without actually taking a sip. "You know, Mom," he said after several minutes, "I've been thinking about your house. The market's exceptionally good right now. If we listed this place, you could clear enough for a nice retirement community apartment and have substantial cash reserves. I've told you before, Richard. I'm not selling my home." His expression tightened momentarily before he forced a smile. "It's just not practical for someone your age to maintain a property this size. What if you fell? You could lie here for days before anyone found you." "I have Life Alert," I countered, pointing to the button I wore around my neck. "And Mrs. Jenkins next door checks on me daily." Richard's frustration became increasingly apparent as our conversation continued. He seemed especially agitated that I hadn't consumed more of my water, frequently glancing at my still nearly full glass. "You're not drinking your water, Mom," he noted with forced casualness. "Staying hydrated is important at your age." "I'm not particularly thirsty." He picked up his own glass again, bringing it to his lips but stopping just short of drinking. A suspicion crossed my mind. Was he waiting for me to finish mine first? The thought made my skin crawl. Making a show of reaching for my glass, I deliberately knocked it over, spilling water across the coffee table and carpet. "Oh dear!" I exclaimed. "How clumsy of me." Richard jumped up, his expression flickering between concern and intense frustration. "Don't worry about it, Mom. I'll get you another glass." "No need," I said firmly. I wasn't thirsty anyway. The tension between us was palpable as he settled back into his seat, still holding his untouched water. The moment stretched uncomfortably until I decided it was time to force his hand. "Richard," I said quietly, "I know about the insurance policy." Richard's face went completely blank for a moment before he composed his features into a mask of confusion. "Insurance policy? What are you talking about, Mom?" "The $2 million life insurance policy you took out on me 3 months ago," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "The one in your briefcase yesterday." His eyes darted to his briefcase and back to me. "You went through my private papers?" Indignation replaced confusion, his tone accusatory rather than defensive. "I saw my name on a folder that fell out," I explained. "Given your recent interest in my finances, I was concerned." Richard set down his water glass and leaned forward, switching tactics. "Mom, you're misunderstanding the situation. That policy is just prudent financial planning." "Planning I knew nothing about? With a forged signature." "Not forged," he countered quickly. "You signed several documents when we updated your will last year. That was among them." "We both know that's not true, Richard." He sighed heavily, running a hand through his hair in apparent exasperation. "Look, the policy is a standard estate planning tool. It helps offset inheritance taxes and provides liquidity for your assets when you pass. Every financial advisor recommends them for clients in your situation. Then why not discuss it with me openly?" "Because you get emotional about these topics," he said dismissively. "You refuse to consider practical financial strategies if they make you uncomfortable. I was trying to protect your interests without causing you unnecessary stress." His explanation sounded rehearsed, almost plausible if not for the water glass sitting between us. I glanced pointedly at it. "And what's in the water, Richard? Is that also for my benefit?" Color drained from his face. "What?" "The substance you added to my water when you thought I wasn't looking. Is that part of your financial planning strategy too?" Richard's expression cycled rapidly through shock, denial, and calculation. "Mom, you're not making sense. I think you might be confused. Have you been taking your medications properly?" The gaslighting attempt ignited something fierce within me. "The cameras saw everything, Richard. Every drop from that vial in your pocket." "Cameras?" His head jerked up, scanning the room. "What cameras?" I held up my phone, displaying the kitchen feed clearly showing him tampering with my drink. His face contorted with rage so intense I barely recognized him. You were spying on me? Your own son, he snarled. And you were poisoning me? Your own mother? I countered, my voice breaking. The woman who worked 3 jobs to raise you after your father died? Richard stood abruptly, pacing the room like a caged animal. You have no idea what I'm dealing with. The company's collapsing. There are investigations, lawsuits. I could lose everything, my house, my reputation, even face criminal charges. So your solution was to murder me for insurance money? The words hung in the air between us, finally spoken aloud. It wouldn't have been murder, he snapped, dropping all pretense. You're almost 70 with a heart condition. No one would have questioned it. You would have gone peacefully in your sleep, and your assets would have protected your grandchildren's future, instead of being drained away by years in some nursing home. The casual cruelty of his rationalization stunned me into silence. This stranger wearing my son's face continued his justification. Do you have any idea what memory care facilities cost? $60,000 to $80,000 annually. Your savings would be depleted in 3 years, leaving nothing for the family. This way would have preserved your dignity and your legacy. My legacy? I finally found my voice. You think my legacy is about money? Your father and I raised you to value people over possessions, Richard. What happened to that boy? That boy grew up and saw how the world really works, he spat. Dad's principles left us struggling paycheck to paycheck while his brothers built real wealth. I swore I'd never live that way. And look where that's gotten you. Contemplating patricide to solve your financial problems. Matricide, he corrected coldly. Patricide is killing your father. The detached, technical correction broke something inside me. Tears I'd been holding back spilled freely down my cheeks. Get out of my house, Richard. Now. And if I don't, will you call the police? Report your son? Think about what that would do to Emma and James. The mention of my grandchildren was a calculated blow. Richard knew my relationship with them, while distant, remained precious to me. I have the video evidence, I said, holding up my phone. But I haven't decided what to do with it yet. That depends on what happens next. Richard stared at me, reassessing the situation. His eyes darted to his untouched water glass, a horrible realization dawning on his face. You switched them, he whispered. You switched the glasses when I was outside. Yes. His face paled. Mom, what was in that water won't hurt you unless you have a specific heart condition. I researched it carefully. It would have looked like natural causes, been completely painless. How considerate of you to choose a gentle poison for your mother, I replied, my voice thick with sarcasm and grief. Richard grabbed his briefcase, clearly calculating his options. The video doesn't prove anything conclusive. It would be your word against mine. And I'm a respected financial advisor while you're an elderly woman who might be experiencing confusion. Perhaps, I acknowledged. But are you willing to risk it? Your career is already hanging by a thread. How would potential clients feel about these allegations, even if unproven? He paused at the door, turning back with an expression I'd never seen before. A mixture of hatred and fear that chilled me to my core. This isn't over, Mom. Think carefully about your next move. Remember who else gets hurt if you pursue this. After he left, I sat motionless in my living room for hours, the untouched poisoned water still on the coffee table. A physical manifestation of my son's betrayal. Eventually, I carefully transferred it to a sealed container. Whatever happened next, I would need evidence beyond just the video recording. That night, I called William Anderson, my doctor and friend for over 30 years, explaining the situation through tears and broken sentences. He arrived within the hour, bringing with him a nurse friend who specialized in toxicology screening. Martha, we need to have this analyzed immediately, William said, examining the sealed container. And we need to contact the authorities. Not yet, I pleaded. Let me figure out what he used first. I need to understand exactly what he planned before I decide what to do. William disagreed but respected my wishes, taking the sample for private testing through connections at the hospital laboratory. 2 days later, he confirmed my worst fears. It contained a compound that intensifies the effects of your heart medication, he explained gently. In sufficient quantity, It would have triggered cardiac arrest that would appear natural given your medical history. The clinical confirmation of Richard's intentions removed any lingering doubt. My son had meticulously planned my death, choosing a method that would leave no suspicion while maximizing his financial gain. The boy I had raised, loved, and sacrificed for had calculated the value of my life, and found it worth more to him ended than continuing. I had decisions to make, difficult ones that would affect not just Richard and me, but Stephanie and my grandchildren as well. The weight of those choices pressed down on me as I contemplated my next steps. The following morning, I contacted Catherine Reynolds, an attorney specializing in elder law whom I'd met through library fundraising events. Her office, located in a converted Victorian home downtown, provided a comforting environment for the difficult conversation ahead. Insurance fraud is serious enough, Catherine explained after reviewing my evidence, but attempted murder elevates this to criminal territory I don't typically handle. We need to involve law enforcement. I'm worried about my grandchildren, I admitted. This will destroy their family. Catherine's expression softened. Martha, their family is already in trouble if their father is willing to poison his mother for financial gain. Think about what example that sets, or what might happen if he becomes desperate enough to try something with them. Her words struck home. I'd been so focused on protecting Emma and James from scandal that I hadn't considered they might need protection from Richard himself. With trembling hands, I signed the forms authorizing Catherine to contact the police. Detective James Holloway from the Elder Abuse Division arrived that afternoon. In his mid-50s with salt and pepper hair and kind eyes that had clearly seen the worst of humanity, he reviewed the video evidence and water sample analysis with professional detachment. Unfortunately, Mrs. Williams, what you're describing isn't as uncommon as people might think, he said. Financial exploitation of elders by family members often escalates when the perpetrator faces personal financial crisis. Will you arrest him? I asked, simultaneously dreading and needing the answer. Based on this evidence, yes. The video clearly shows tampering with your drink, and the toxicology report confirms the substance was potentially lethal given your medical condition. Combined with the unauthorized insurance policy, we have sufficient cause. Detective Holloway explained the process ahead: formal statements, evidence collection, and probable criminal charges against Richard, including attempted murder, insurance fraud, and elder abuse. Each clinical detail twisted the knife deeper in my heart. The arrest occurred the following day at Richard's office. Detective Holloway had insisted on a public apprehension, rather than allowing Richard the dignity of surrendering himself. If we contact him ahead of time, he might destroy evidence or flee, he explained. And frankly, Mrs. Williams, your son has forfeited consideration through his actions. I wasn't present for the arrest, but Diane, who had flown in from Arizona to support me, heard details from her hotel near Richard's office building. Apparently, uniformed officers had entered Pinnacle Wealth Management during a client meeting, placing Richard in handcuffs as colleagues and customers watched in shocked silence. The story made the evening news, his professional humiliation now a matter of public record. Stephanie called that night, her voice oscillating between fury and disbelief. How could you do this to him? She demanded. To our family? Couldn't you have handled this privately? He tried to kill me, Stephanie, I replied quietly. For insurance money. That's ridiculous. Richard would never. He said you're confused, that you misinterpreted his estate planning efforts. He said you've been showing signs of paranoia. Did he explain the video of him putting something in my drink? Or the toxicology report showing it contained compounds that would trigger heart failure? Her silence spoke volumes. I'm sorry about the children, I continued. Truly. But this wasn't my choice. It was his. The conversation ended with Stephanie hanging up, but 3 days later she appeared at my door, eyes red from crying and considerably more subdued. I saw the evidence, she admitted, accepting the tea I offered. His lawyer showed me everything, trying to gauge if I would support him in court. She stared into her cup. I've moved out with the kids. Filed for separation. Her revelation brought me no satisfaction, only deeper sadness for the collateral damage of Richard's actions. We talked for hours that afternoon, Stephanie revealing the extent of their financial troubles, the failed investments, mounting debt, and Richard's increasingly desperate behavior over the past year. He kept saying he had a solution coming, she said. Something that would fix everything. I never thought he could. She couldn't complete the sentence. Neither could I. Meanwhile, the legal process advanced with methodical indifference to our family's pain. Catherine arranged a meeting with the district attorney, a stern woman named Rachel Thornton who specialized in elder abuse cases. The evidence is compelling, Mrs. Williams, she explained in her office overlooking the courthouse. Mr. Williams is currently charged with attempted murder, insurance fraud, forgery, and financial elder abuse. If convicted on all counts, he faces up to 20 years in prison. 20 years. My son would be in his 60s upon release, his life effectively over. Despite everything, maternal instinct recoiled at the thought. Are there alternatives? I asked hesitantly. Rachel's expression remained neutral. There's always the possibility of a plea arrangement, though that would require your son's cooperation and admission of guilt. Given the evidence, his attorney will likely advise him to consider it. Richard was released on bail 1 week after his arrest, with conditions including an ankle monitor and a restraining order preventing him from coming within 500 feet of me or my property. Catherine helped me obtain additional security measures, changing locks, installing a monitored alarm system, and arranging check-in calls from police patrol units. The precautions proved necessary when Richard violated the restraining order 2 days after his release, parking down the street from my house at midnight. Mrs. Jenkins spotted his car during her insomnia-driven nocturnal observations and called police immediately. Though he fled before officers arrived, the incident was documented and his bail conditions tightened. Throughout this period, I found unexpected support developing around me. Diane extended her stay indefinitely, moving into my guest room and providing companionship I hadn't realized how desperately I needed. Beverly organized a rotation of friends checking in daily, bringing meals and offering transportation to appointments. William insisted on weekly health assessments, concerned about the stress impact on my heart. Your numbers are holding steady, he assured me during one visit. But I'm more worried about the emotional toll. Have you considered talking to someone professionally? On his recommendation, I began seeing Dr. Sarah Reynolds, a therapist specializing in trauma and family betrayal. Our weekly sessions provided space to express the complicated grief I was experiencing. Mourning the son I thought I knew while fearing the man he had become. You're grieving a living person, Dr. Reynolds observed during one particularly difficult session. That creates a unique form of ambiguous loss that few people understand. Through these conversations, I gradually processed the terrible reality that the child I had raised with love and sacrifice had calculated the value of my life against his financial needs and found it wanting. The boy who once brought me dandelion bouquets had grown into a man who could contemplate my death without apparent remorse. Understanding this required reconstructing my entire narrative of motherhood and family. As the criminal case proceeded through preliminary hearings, Catherine introduced me to Thomas Bradford, a financial advisor specializing in recovery for victims of exploitation. With his guidance, I began reclaiming financial independence, closing compromised accounts, establishing new secure ones, and creating financial protections against future attempts at manipulation. Financial abuse leaves psychological scars as well as monetary ones, Thomas explained during our first meeting. Rebuilding financial confidence is part of your healing process. 2 months after Richard's arrest, his attorney approached the district attorney with a plea offer. In exchange for reduced charges and a sentencing recommendation of 7 years instead of 20, Richard would plead guilty to attempted insurance fraud, forgery, and reckless endangerment, avoiding the attempted murder charge that carried the heaviest penalty. Rachel presented the offer during a difficult meeting in her office. It's your decision whether we accept this, Mrs. Williams, she said. We have strong evidence and could pursue the maximum charges. But trials are difficult, especially when family members are involved. I thought about Emma and James, already traumatized by their father's arrest and their parents' separation. A lengthy, public trial would only extend their suffering. If I accept the plea, what happens to my grandchildren? I asked. That would be determined in family court, separately from the criminal proceedings. but avoiding a public trial might make eventual healing easier for them. After consulting with Catherine and Dr. Reynolds, I agreed to the plea arrangement with one additional condition. Richard would be required to undergo psychological evaluation and treatment during his incarceration. The day Richard formally accepted the plea agreement, I sat in the back of the courtroom, Diane beside me gripping my hand. My son looked diminished in his dark suit, shoulders hunched as the judge reviewed the terms. "Do you understand that by pleading guilty to these charges, you waive your right to a trial?" the judge asked. "Yes, Your Honor," Richard replied, his voice barely audible. "And do you enter this plea voluntarily without coercion?" "Yes, Your Honor." When asked if he wished to make a statement before sentencing, Richard turned slightly, his eyes meeting mine across the courtroom for the first time since his arrest. "I'm sorry it came to this," he said, his words directed ostensibly at the judge but clearly meant for me. Financial pressures can make people unrecognizable, even to themselves. It wasn't a true apology, more a justification wrapped in regret for being caught. Yet it was the closest acknowledgement I might ever receive of the pain he had caused. As bailiffs led him away to begin his sentence, I allowed myself to weep openly for all that had been lost. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited with cameras and microphones. Catherine shepherded me through the gauntlet with practiced efficiency. "Mrs. Williams has no comment at this time," she repeated as we moved toward the waiting car. "This is a private family tragedy, not a public spectacle." But of course, it had become both. A cautionary tale of greed and betrayal that would define our family's legacy far more than any financial inheritance ever could. 6 months after Richard began serving his sentence, I sat in a circle of women at the community center downtown, listening as Nancy described finding her daughter stealing her pain medication to sell for profit. "I changed my locks," she concluded, twisting her wedding ring nervously. "My own child, and I had to lock her out for my safety." Murmurs of understanding rippled through our group, Betrayed Parents Support Circle. We called ourselves. Each Tuesday evening we gathered to share experiences too painful and complex for those who hadn't lived them to truly comprehend. "The hardest part is the shame," Gloria added. "My friends ask about Michael and I make excuses. How do you tell people your son embezzled your retirement funds?" I nodded, intimately familiar with the isolation that comes from having your trust violated by the person you once trusted most in the world. When it was my turn to speak, I shared my latest challenge. "Richard wants me to visit him in prison," I said. "His therapist thinks it could be beneficial for his rehabilitation. I'm not sure I'm ready for that." "You don't owe him anything," Rachel, our group facilitator, reminded me gently. "Healing happens on your timeline, not his." This circle of women had become a cornerstone of my recovery. Unlike well-meaning friends who offered platitudes about forgiveness, these women understood the complex grief of mourning someone still living, the constant questioning of where parental love ended and self-preservation began. My life had reorganized itself around new routines and relationships in the months since the trial. Diane had returned to Arizona, but we spoke daily, our previously distant relationship transformed by shared crisis. Beverly and I expanded our weekly coffee dates to include museum visits and occasional weekend trips to coastal towns. William still monitored my health monthly, though his visits now included discussions of his grandchildren and recommendations for novels we both enjoyed. The most unexpected development came through Stephanie, who initially disappeared from my life after the trial but resurfaced when Emma, now 15, asked to see her grandmother. "She has questions only you can answer," Stephanie explained during an awkward phone call. "About Richard, about what happened. I've told her what I can, but..." Our first meeting took place at a neutral location, a tea room downtown that served proper English afternoon tea. Emma arrived in typical teenage armor of practiced indifference, but her eyes, so like Richard's before ambition hardened them, betrayed her vulnerability. "Mom said you didn't want Dad to go to jail," she began after preliminary pleasantries. "Is that true?" "Yes," I answered honestly. "I didn't want any of this to happen. But he tried to hurt you. The kids at school say he tried to kill you."
I vinsel her blondsnis.
"What happened was complicated, Emma. Your father made terrible choices when he felt desperate, but that doesn't erase the good parts of him or the love he has for you." Our conversation that afternoon began a careful rebuilding. Emma visited regularly after that, sometimes bringing her younger brother James. Initially, Stephanie would drop them off and leave, but gradually she began staying, our shared concern for the children creating a fragile bridge between us. For months into these visits, Stephanie made an unexpected request. "The house we're renting is being sold," she explained hesitantly. "The market's impossible right now, and with my teacher's salary. You need a place to stay," I finished for her. "Just temporarily. 3 months maximum while I find something affordable. The kids could use stability, and it would give them more time with you." The irony wasn't lost on me. Offering my home to the family of the man who had tried to take it from me permanently. Yet the arrangement made sense on multiple levels. My house had always felt too empty after Richard left for college. Now it would shelter his children during their own period of transition. They moved in the following weekend. Stephanie taking the guest room, Emma claiming Richard's old bedroom, and James settling into the converted den. The initial awkwardness gradually gave way to a functioning, if unconventional, household routine. "It's not how I imagined being a live-in grandmother," I confided to Dr. Reynolds during therapy. "But there's healing in it for all of us, I think." Meanwhile, I redirected my energy toward protecting others from similar betrayal. Catherine connected me with the Elder Rights Coalition, a nonprofit organization dedicated to preventing elder abuse through education and advocacy. I began speaking at community centers and retirement homes, sharing my experience and warning signs I'd missed. Financial exploitation often begins with small boundary violations. I would explain to rooms full of seniors. Unauthorized account access, pressure to change wills or property titles, isolation from friends who might notice problems. These presentations were difficult but purposeful, transforming my private pain into public prevention. After one such talk, an elderly man approached me with tears in his eyes. "You've described exactly what my nephew has been doing," he whispered. "I thought I was just being suspicious." Thomas, the financial advisor who helped rebuild my financial security, invited me to co-present workshops on financial protection for seniors. We developed a simple checklist of safety measures, account monitoring systems, power of attorney limitations, communication protocols with financial institutions that participants could implement immediately. "You've found your calling," Thomas remarked after one particularly successful workshop. "Your story resonates because you speak from authentic experience." On the first anniversary of Richard's sentencing, I finally felt ready to visit him in prison. Dr. Reynolds and I had prepared extensively for this encounter, developing strategies for maintaining emotional boundaries while allowing for possible reconciliation. The medium security facility was a 3-hour drive from home. Stephanie offered to accompany me, but this was a journey I needed to make alone. The visiting room, with its uncomfortable plastic chairs and vending machines, seemed an appropriately stark setting for our reunion. Richard appeared thinner, his designer confidence replaced by institutional conformity. We sat across from each other, separated by a small table and incalculable emotional distance. "You look well, Mom," he offered tentatively. "I am well," I replied. "Better than expected, given everything." Our conversation moved carefully through neutral territory. His prison routine, my health, superficial updates about Emma and James. Neither of us mentioned the insurance policy or poison water that had led us here. Those topics would come in future visits, perhaps, but this initial reconnection required gentler handling. As our allotted time ended, Richard asked the question that had clearly been weighing on him. "Do you think you'll ever forgive me?" I considered his words carefully before responding. "Forgiveness isn't a single moment, Richard. It's a process, and I'm still in the middle of it. I don't know where it ends." His eyes, so like his father's, filled with tears. "I don't deserve another chance." "Probably not," I agreed. "But family is complicated. We'll take it one visit at a time." Driving home afterward, I felt an unexpected lightness. Not closure, that simplified concept beloved by talk shows and self-help books, but a shifting toward something resembling peace. The son I had raised still existed somewhere within the man who had betrayed me, both realities simultaneously true and irreconcilable. By the time Thanksgiving arrived, Our unconventional household had developed comfortable rhythms. Stephanie had found a new teaching position but postponed moving out until after the holidays. Emma was thriving in her new school, and James had developed an unexpected interest in gardening, helping me prepare raised beds for spring planting. "I think we should invite people over for Thanksgiving," I suggested during a family dinner in early November. Beverly and her son Thomas, Catherine and her partner William and his wife. "Are you sure that's not too much?" Stephanie asked, concern evident in her expression. "I'm sure," I replied confidently. "This house needs voices and laughter again." Thanksgiving Day arrived crisp and clear. Our dining room table, extended with leaves and used for decades, accommodated 12 people. Our new family of choice assembled from the fragments of crisis. Beverly brought her famous sweet potato casserole. Catherine arrived with expensive wine, and William's grandchildren immediately bonded with Emma and James over video games in the living room. As we gathered around the table, I looked at the faces surrounding me, none related by blood except my grandchildren, yet each connected through threads of support, understanding, and authentic care. This, I realized, was the family I had rebuilt from the ashes of betrayal. "Before we eat," I said, raising my glass, "I want to thank each of you for being part of this journey. A year ago, I couldn't imagine feeling thankful again, yet here we are." The conversation and laughter flowed easily throughout the meal, healing in its ordinary pleasure. Later, as guests departed with leftovers and warm embraces, Beverly lingered to help with final cleanup. "You've come through fire, Martha," she observed, drying a serving platter. "Not everyone could have rebuilt their life this way." "I had help," I reminded her, gesturing to include the house and everyone who had filled it. After everyone had gone and the children were asleep, I sat alone in my living room, the house quiet but no longer empty. The path forward remained uncertain. Richard would eventually be released, relationships would continue evolving, new challenges would emerge. But I had learned the most valuable lesson of my 70 years. Resilience wasn't about avoiding cracks in your foundation, but about what you built upon the repaired surface. My phone buzzed with a message from Catherine. "Wonderful evening. You've created something beautiful from something terrible. That's real strength." I smiled, typing my response. "Not strength, stubborn survival." And good friends. What would you do if someone you loved betrayed your trust in a devastating way? Could you find the courage to rebuild your life and possibly even forgive? Leave a comment below with your thoughts on how you might handle such a situation. If you found Martha's journey meaningful, please like this video, subscribe to hear more stories of resilience, and share with someone who might need to be reminded of their own strength today. Remember, sometimes our greatest healing comes through connections we never expected to make. Thank you for being part of this community, and I'll see you in the next story.